are listening to ComedySlamRadio.com. From our studios to the world, we bring you the finest in quality entertainment. So pop some popcorn, grab a smooch buddy, and settle in for another fine show from ComedySlamRadio.com.
Thank you for tuning in to the Let's Be Frank show on ComedySlamRadio.com, where we bring you national touring and celebrity comedian interviews. Follow us on Twitter at Let's Be Frank Show, and if you miss our live broadcast, you can find us on Stitcher Radio and iTunes at Let's Be Frank's Podcast, and please contact us with any questions or information about advertising and sponsoring at Let's Be Frank with Dave Frank at yahoo.com. Good evening, and welcome to the Let's Be Frank show. This week, we have a very great and interesting comedian, Dan Neinan. And not only is Dan Neinan a great comedian, but he's 100% clean. And I don't mean that he showers, but I'm sure he does. But unlike most comedians now, he's always clean, very professional. And it's just rare today to find a comic that stays clean and doesn't really ever go blue. So, Dan, thank you for joining the show. How you doing tonight?
Hey, it's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate it very much.
It's my pleasure to have you on. I think I've only had 2 or 3 true, real clean comics that have come on. And, you know, we had Tom Ryan and Tom Dreesen, some of the cleanest comics out there, like yourself.
Oh, Tom Dreesen's fantastic. I actually did an event with him in L.A., and he's an amazing, and I think he's been on the Tonight Show like 50 times or something. He's incredible.
He has. He's actually, he's the only person that's ever been able to host the Tonight Show when David Letterman wasn't there. So I guess David Letterman was out with shingles one time, and Tom got to fill his shoes, which is a great honor, let alone a great experience.
I know. I now remember the show was called Right to Laugh. It was a right-wing comedy show, and you know, Tom's very right-wing, and I'm kind of middle of the road, so I do both right-wing and left-wing shows, and so it was great to hear his perspective, and it was fantastic.
I agree 100%. And I was listening to a bunch of your comedy and some of the different things that you've done on your YouTube channel, and you talk a lot about your family, about the fact that you're half Indian and half Japanese. And it's pretty interesting the way you joke about it and you pick on your father and your mom. And, you know, I found that real interesting. It's something that I mean to tap into my own family experiences, but I haven't found a way to do it that my family's not going to disown me yet.
Right. Well, people ask me if my parents are upset about the fact that I'm joking about them. They wrote my material for me. Those are real quotes.
I know. I like how you were saying, what was it that you had seen the cow grazing, and
That's actually a true story.
I
bet. True story.
Go ahead and tell everybody that, because I think it's funny. I mean, it'll go great over radio, I think.
Well, it's true. We were driving to the airport, actually, here in D.C., where my parents live, and we saw these cows grazing in a field. And so my dad says, you know, oh, well, there's a word that can have a lot of different meanings. Graze, for example, cows can graze. And then I said, or you can be grazed by a bullet, especially if you're hanging out with Vice President Cheney. And then my mom, who's Japanese, says, or it's a kind of donut. And she couldn't distinguish between, you know, the L and the R.
Grazed donuts.
I just wish I had 100 jokes like that, because it's just so funny, and it's true.
It is, and it's funny, and it's good that you can pick on your family and the accents, and want it go over, it be clean, and not get disowned.
I know. So they're quite proud of me. They came to see me at the Kennedy Center last year, and there were 2,000 people there. It was amazing. They were quite proud.
Yeah, and you've consistently played in front of some very large audiences, and in front of a lot of, you know, Fortune 500 companies as a corporate comedian, which I think probably has a lot to do with how clean of an act that you maintain, no matter what topic you talk about.
And 3 months ago, the president. So if you go to YouTube and you search for my last name, Nainan, which is Nainan, and Obama, you'll actually see him commenting on me. The thing about it is, I've never actually thought of myself as particularly a great comic, but the thing that gets me in front of all of those audiences and charity galas and cruise ships and corporate events and so on is staying away from the profanity. And it's just such a simple thing, and yet so many comedians don't know how to do that, and that they could expand their income 100, maybe 1,000-fold by doing so, and yet so many people seem to have a hard time doing that.
Did you ever? So let's take it back to when you first started comedy. When you first got to your first open mic, were you already being clean, or did you start off like everybody else, a little blue and not knowing where they were going to go?
The first time I ever did comedy, believe it or not, was not an open mic. I took a class with Judy Carter out on the West Coast. I was working at Intel, and she was offering a class in San Francisco. So once a week for, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks, I drove up to San Francisco on a Saturday and took her class. And she also had said in that class, if you work clean, that you'll work so many more places, and instead of having to work in a club for $25 and having to, you can't even get a free drink, right. You can perform in corporations for $10,000 and they'll fly you first class. And for some reason that didn't really register with me at that time, but now looking back on that, I realized that was some of the most amazing advice I'd ever gotten. I'm just trying to think, I did a couple of, in my first set, which was at the Punchline, at the kind of, I guess you could call it the graduation of the comedy class. I had a couple of things that were off color, but by and large it was totally clean. And then, of course, what really changed things was when I met Jerry Seinfeld right after I started doing this. And I asked him for advice. He said, "You should work clean. You will work everywhere." And that's kind of what really inspired me to do just nothing even remotely blue. And it worked.
And it does work. It makes a lot of sense. And, it's the exact same advice that Tom Dreesen gave. It's the same advice when Judy Carter gave, or that Judy Carter gave when she called into the show a few weeks back. It seems to be a popular theme. I don't think that I'm a dirty comic myself. I think if I'm gonna talk about the male or female anatomy, I normally use jokingly terms, or I may say the word pecker as opposed to something that's a 4-letter word, or just because, I want to be invited back, and I'm still, I might be just maybe a smidge of budge being open micer myself. I'm to the point where I get invited to do some guest sets and some MC work at a lot of the local clubs now, which is I'm just about 2 years in, so I think timing wise it's starting to pick up and happen for me. It's a little slow of a process.
Where are you located? You're in
We're in the Tampa Bay, Florida area.
Yeah, that's a great area for comedy, and of course I love that area. It's fantastic, and I've done a few shows there. The only slight disadvantage you might have is that there aren't just as many venues as you would have in New York or LA, and that's what's so wonderful about being in New York or LA, especially New York, because you can walk around and do all these shows and not even have to drive anywhere, and there are literally probably hundreds of places you can perform, so you get to develop a lot faster. But going back to the clean thing, and there's different levels of clean. Like there's television clean, and then there's also corporate clean, which is a completely different level. And so you really have to. There's a totally different level of cleanliness. There's a lot of stuff that you could do on television that absolutely would not be acceptable in a corporate environment.
Right. Now, after you graduated her class with Judy, and you started doing comedy, did you start off in the clubs and work? Obviously, I would think you started off in the clubs and worked your way up to theaters and corporate events. How did that progression go for you?
Well, what happened was when I took the class, then it's really interesting what happened. I did that final exam, which was a packed house at the Punchline in San Francisco, and that went really, really well, and I just killed it. And she had put me in a really good spot towards the end, as opposed to being early and taking the bullet. And I was fortunate enough to get the tape, and I can't tell you how important it is to just tape everything you do, because having that tape is what really changed my life, because they heard about me taking the class at Intel, and then they watched the tape, and they really, really liked it. And I happened to be out at the CES show in Las Vegas, and they said, hey, why don't you perform tonight at the team dinner? And the team dinner was kind of like the culmination of the convention for Intel, the huge booth. We had about 250 people out there. So it's the last night of the convention, and I'm on the top floor of the Riviera in front of 250 Intel employees. And I did my impressions of Andy Grove, the chairman, which I wrote this whole act about him. And he's a very, very strong-willed, kind of this real abrupt guy with a real thick Hungarian accent. And they were just dying. And then someone came up to me and said, hey, can you do this at the annual sales conference for 2,500 Intel salespeople from around the world? And I was like, oh my God, that's terrifying. But at the same time, I said, I have to do it. I've got to do this. So it was Monday morning, and at 8 o'clock in the San Francisco Hilton, and nobody had been drinking, which is a tough crowd. 2,500 salespeople from places like India and Argentina and France, and the whole international sales force. And I just did the impressions of Grove, I did impressions of Clinton, and some Intel jokes, and they were just dying. They were pounding on tables, and I got this huge just roar, and I was so terrified because it was my third performance ever, and my left leg was literally shaking behind the podium. And then after I got off stage, all these people came up to me, and people who didn't know me in the company, and they said, hey, you're not really an Intel employee, but you were hired as a professional comedian to pretend you're an Intel employee, right? Because what we did is we made it seem as if something had gone wrong with one of my on-stage demonstrations, and I said, well, while we get this fixed, let me tell you some jokes. And so they all assumed I was a professional comedian, and that's when I kind of had the inkling that I could do this for a living.
Nice.
And because 2,500 people on my third show, and then after that, I think I did one club out there, Rooster Teeth Feathers, and I made this video package and all this promo, and I just completely, utterly, and totally bombed. And I had done a few Intel events after that, 2,500 salespeople, and I was thinking, oh, I'm so funny, I'm so great, and this is something that happens to every comedian: is you'll do 5 or 10 great shows, and then you'll run into this thing where you completely bomb, and you just really want to quit because it's so humiliating. Fortunately, I didn't quit. I got promoted to a job in New York that was home-based. It was 2 levels higher, and since it was home-based, I had more time, and then I did that for a year, and I really didn't like it, and I decided to leave and pursue comedy full-time, and that's how I got started in New York. And what really helped in New York, the one thing that helped, and I think has been the most helpful thing in my career, was to continue taking a comedy class, this time with Steve Rosenfield at the American Comedy Institute. And I still take that class. In fact, I'm going to take it next week. When I'm in New York, when I'm around and I'm off the road, I go to that class every single time that I can, because it's seriously, it's been the most helpful thing for my career. And Steve is not a comedian. He's just a teacher. He's a producer and director. Not a producer, I'm sorry, he's a director. He got a directing degree at Stanford. And so he's not afraid, as he says, he's not afraid to give away any material. So he'll make these suggestions. He's helped me write probably a quarter of my jokes come from him. And he'll add something, make it much funnier. And so I did some clubs in New York, and then it was kind of a quick progression to doing a bunch of Indian shows, and then from there I met Russell Peters, and that's kind of when things really took off, was working with Russell.
That's great. Now, you say you go to the same school or the same class. Does he teach the class differently, or it's a great reminder, or I guess when you go back, it's just like your way of working out jokes with somebody?
What it is it's like Jerry Seinfeld said, comedy is one of the few things where you can only, it has to be done in front of an audience. You can't do it at home. And, you write your stuff alone, and then you go and perform it in front of an audience. And as you probably know, Chris Rock or Jerry Seinfeld or every comedian from the bottom to the top, they have to perform at clubs and try this stuff out, try out their material. And sometimes you'll see, say, Jerry Seinfeld show up, and some of his stuff doesn't work, and people will go, "Oh my goodness, it's not that funny." But see, it's like the gym. He's trying out new stuff. This class gives me the opportunity to try out new stuff in front of a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people who are doing comedy for the first time, who are really positive, and who are a much better reflection of a cross-section of an American audience. Now, here's the problem if you go to an open mic. There's a few problems with the open mic. You have a bunch of bitter, jaded comedians who've never gone anywhere, who are purposely not going to laugh. They're people whose sense of humor is different from the average public, member of the public. A lot of them are bent over their notebooks and working on their own stuff, and they're not even listening to you. And as the night progresses, each comedian performs, and then they leave immediately. So if you're towards the end, it's like you have a nearly empty room you're performing to. So performing for open mics, it just doesn't give you a good enough indication of what the public will find funny, and that's what I love about this class.
And that's it's very true. And although I guess I don't actually go to a class, but normally every Sunday, me and a group of comedians, which is led by one of a great local comedian who traveled all around the country for years, Steve Eric, and he meets up with us at this one local club. It's Coconuts in Clearwater. And on Sundays, a group of us open micers or young comedians will come in and we'll share some of the things that we're working on. And he'll talk to them about us and tell us, most of the time, it's how to shorten the jokes up and how to get to the point a little bit quicker. Because right now we're still working in clubs. So, you got to do your setup, punchline. You don't have that time to you don't always have the time to tell the long-winded story yet. Because, you're not that popular name. They're there to laugh. They're not there just to see you. Where if you're booking a venue, like when you book a venue, they're there to see you. So you have that time, with 1,500 people that are just there to see Dan, to tell a little bit of the story and engage with the audience a little bit more, which is, it's where everybody hopes to get to. But
so now let me ask you, when you're at Coconuts on a Sunday, are there what I call civilians, or is it all comedians?
It's actually all comedians. The room is pretty empty. I'd say normally there's anywhere between 4 and 10 people there. And we'll literally all break out one or two jokes that we're working on. And he's taught me different ways to write, how to set up the jokes, how to remember jokes better. And it's not just him, it's everybody that's there. There's a group of people, Paul Olin, and, there's other comedians that'll come in that aren't there every week. But Steve's there every week, and I mean, he's helped so many great comedians in the past that have gone on to do great things, and he just enjoys helping people with it when it comes to that. So I've actually haven't ever taken a full-blown comedy class, although I have thought about that might be the next level that I go into. I just haven't done it yet. I think I've gotten so wrapped up in this show because the show has taken off so well and has thousands of listeners. And
it's fantastic.
Thank you. And it takes a lot of time to set up the shows, and I'm constantly out searching for new guests that are coming in. I know in the next couple of weeks we have Jay Wendell Walker, who has probably been doing comedy a little over 50 years. Josh Sneed, who's pretty popular right now. And a lot of great people that have called in the past, and I try to keep in contact with them. The whole process has been interesting, but sometimes I find I get a little bit caught up in the setup and the marketing for the program than I do in my comedy. I'm kind of torn which one I like better.
Well, let me ask you, is there a class offered in your area?
I think at the Tampa Improv, sometimes they have some comedians do it. It's never the same comedian. Sometimes it's some of the local comedians. There's a great local comedian, Steve Laszlo, who he's taught classes there. There's been a few different comedians that have done some national touring stuff that have also gone there, but it's only at the Improv that I think there's been a class offered.
Right. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. The only downside of that is if you have a comedian teaching it, then then you have to ask yourself, well, why is this comedian teaching this class instead of making money working? That's kind of what I like of Steve's class. And he's not a comedian. He's never done comedy, although I think he'd be hilarious. But and actually, he has a 1-week class for people from out of town, and it's kind of a compressed class that takes place for a week, and people come from all over the world for that. And I highly recommend that if you can make it up to New York for a week. The only thing is, I've recommended so many people, and that cheap bastard doesn't give me anything. I said, hey, can you give me a finder's fee or some free class? And he just, it makes me so mad because I've recommended so many people. But, the reason I do recommend him is he's really good, and he's helped some friends of mine a lot. And, of course, he's helped me. And so I would, if you can make it to New York and take his 1-week class, I can't say enough good things about him because he teaches you a lot of things that I see even more experienced comedians do make all these mistakes. Like there's one in particular I can think of was pretty well known, and she'll blame the crowd if they don't laugh. She goes, okay, well, you didn't like that one, so let me finish with this one, and then she'll keep going, and she'll go over the light, and he'll teach you that there's a lot of things that you shouldn't do as a comedian. Like, say, for example, a lot of people say, that's my time. And he goes, no, don't say that, because then it's making it seem as if you don't really want to be up there. And he tells you it's all about joyous communication, so you want to come up with a much better closer. And that's what every other comedian says, oh, that's my time. And he'll say, don't apologize, and he's just full of a million tips like that. So what I get out of the class is, the tips, I've heard a lot of them before, but he's always got new ones. But it's more really what it's about is seeing how much the class, my fellow class members laugh because we all perform, and then getting Steve's tips and I guess his toppers that he gives me, which are really just, I don't know, he's just got a real good sense of what people will laugh at and what they won't laugh at.
Well, if you know how to communicate and read people, and apparently that's what he's got, that's being able to read people and know how to communicate them and judge off of their reactions to what you're saying. It's like,
it's really, it sounds difficult, but a lot of it is just timing and just being able to, it's mathematical. Did they laugh at this joke, and if so, how much did they laugh, right? Mm-hmm. And you listen to the tape. He makes us tape everything, and you listen to the laugh, and then which 5 jokes out of my 25 did they laugh at the most? Well, those are the ones that I should probably, take and do in clubs and theaters, right? And so it's very mathematical, and there's a lot of rhythm and timing, and people always say, oh, your timing is amazing, your timing is amazing. Well, what Steve teaches us is, it's a simple matter of just listening. The audience laughs, you wait until they're done laughing, then you talk again, then you wait while they laugh again. And he says, he calls it a conversation, between you and the audience. You talk, they laugh, you talk, they laugh. And some comedians just don't understand. You have to wait until they finish laughing, and he'll say, don't step on their laughs. Don't talk while they're still laughing. And some comedians don't understand that. And he's like, wait a minute, what are you doing? This is what we're here for. This is our objective, is to get them to laugh. And if you step on that, if you talk while they're laughing, you're going to cut their laughter off. It's like, why would you want to do that?
Exactly. And I've watched it with when I watched some of your shows today, just as a refresher, I watched where you would tell your joke, and you might be standing there for 10 or 15 seconds before they stop laughing, and you're just smiling and waiting, where a lot of people are like, what am I supposed to do now? And wow, and they cut off the laughter because they're in a rush to do their material.
I know. There was one guy who was really funny, this guy from New Jersey in the class, and he would go on without literally stopping the whole time. And Steve says, you've got to hold for your laughs, you've got to hold. And it was really funny material. And at the class, the graduation, the show, this was at Caroline's, I'll never forget, he brought something like, 150 people came just to see him it was incredible, the audience he drew. And for 6 minutes, all he did was talk straight, never gave anyone any time to laugh, and they gave him like a cheer at the end, and that was it. And no one ever laughed during the whole thing because he kept talking. Like it was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen a comedian do.
He never gave them their opportunity to laugh, and it's funny,
right? And you have to breathe.
It's funny because Tom Dreesen, I had asked him the first time he ever went on stage, and it was when he went on as a duo with Tim and Tom. And he said the first time they walked in to do a show, they went up and they never shut up. They kept talking and talking and talking. And when they got off the stage, they went to the club manager and said, "How did I do?" And the guy said, "Well, you never stopped talking for me to have an opportunity to laugh. You just never slowed down." And that's, so he said the next night they slowed down. They were a little less nervous. They got more laughs, but they had to learn how to slow down and not step on the laughter. And that's even something that I had to learn on the show. And it was the first time I realized that I was doing it pretty well was when I interviewed Jackie Mason, and he paid me he had paid me a compliment. He goes, he said, "You said you're also a comedian and you're doing the podcast." And he goes, "And you're not even interrupting me." And he goes, it's a great sign of an interviewer, because most comedians want to hear themselves talk. They want to be in the limelight.
This is true.
And this whole show, although it's my show, Let's Be Frank with Dave Frank, it's really about me asking you a question or talking to you, or it's really just like having a conversation. And I pause, you talk, and there's times I notice when I have guests in the audience or guests in the room with me that they'll actually overtalk the comedian that's calling in or overtalk each other. And I got to remind people, hey, when the other person's talking, don't talk, because you cut each other off and people can get a little bit confused.
Yeah, that's one thing that, I'm trying to do myself, is that it's so important to, when you're having a conversation with someone, try not to talk longer than 20 seconds because people's minds wander. Speaking of Jackie Mason, I was in Miami Beach, and then South Beach, and I was walking along, and I saw him at a table sitting with some other guy, and I said, "Oh my goodness, you're Jackie Mason," and blah, blah, blah. And he said, "Hey, sit down and have a cup of coffee." He was so nice. I sat with him for like half an hour. And one thing that, going back to slowing down, my teacher says this a lot, is you have to slow down. And I tend to talk really fast in general, and he says if you want to slow down on stage, you have to slow down in real life. And I talk fast, and when I get on stage, I swear I just have to think to myself, go slower. And still some people will tell me, "Man, you were talking really fast." And one thing that you learn is if you talk slower, number one, my teacher says slow is funny and loud is funny. And you can tell a new comedian because they talk really fast and they're not really talking loudly. And if you slow down, what will happen is you'll have a joke and there'll be like one or two laughs. And if you slow down, you'll realize there are other jokes or there are other laughs along the way. And so you could have, say, set up punchline, whatever, that would have had only two laughs maybe. And then if you slow down and you hear them laughing, it'll be 5 or 6. Right, and that is amazing, because Steve has shown me that if you slow down and you're slower, then you'll actually get more laughs as people laugh along the way. And that one story I told you about the glazed donut, that was only a big laugh at the end, but I realized there were 4 or 5 laughs inside now that I get, which I didn't have before. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Chris Rock said, when he felt himself bombing, that most people would speed up. He says you've got to slow down. He says if he feels himself bombing, he will purposely slow down, because if you're not getting laughs, then you get nervous and you'll start to speed up, and then you'll speed up. This is what happened the time I bombed at Rooster Teeth Feathers way back when, is I kept getting faster and faster, and then the faster you go, people can't understand you, they laugh less, you get more and more nervous, and then you eventually collapse. And I left the stage early because I was doing so poorly. So one thing is just, as Chris Rock says, if you feel yourself bombing, just slow down, and that's great advice.
I would agree. I've caught myself where I've had a joke that bombed, and so what I've done is I've picked on myself a little bit, where I'm like, okay, I guess I won't be telling that joke next week, or I guess that was only funny to me, and then the audience will laugh along with that part, and I move on past it.
Bomb lines are fantastic, and if you can come up with funny bomb lines, it can actually be funnier than some of the jokes. It's awesome.
I joke around a lot about, most of my comedy is self-deprecating humor. I'm a pretty heavy-set guy. I go on stage as Fat Davey, and I tell a bunch of fat jokes. and I comment a lot when I talk to other comedians and they talk about their acts. And I look, a lot of people I think do a smarter brand of comedy than I do. I think when you tell a fat joke, it kind of goes, it's multicultural, it's everything, because it doesn't matter what race, what country, where you're from, or everybody has a fat guy in their family, or it's something for me that everybody can relate to. And I think because I've always pretty much done well with it, it's been hard for me to branch off into talking more about my family or into like my daily experiences in life, which I've done a little bit, but the fat jokes have just always, for the most part, I've never really had a rough time with them. So you find that niche and you kind of like to stick to it, and I have to force myself to go past that still.
Well, I agree. The thing that I think people really like in a comedian is being vulnerable, and if you can be self-deprecating and you show your vulnerability, I think that's a great thing. If you look at comedians in general, I mean, there's certainly some exceptionally, I guess, good-looking model types, but by and large, if you look at comedians, we're not like the best-looking people in the crowd, and I think people can relate to someone who is not necessarily, someone who looks like a model or a pretty boy or a beautiful girl. I just think of, there are exceptions again. I mean, Daniel Tosh is a pretty good-looking guy, but by and large, I just think comedians, we have some sort of flaw, and if you can be self-deprecating and vulnerable, I think that's a great thing. Look at John Panette. I mean, his funniest stuff is fat jokes, about the buffet and all that. I mean, if you can do that, that's great. If you can get laughs.
Yeah, and there's even Dan Whitney, or as more affectionately known, Larry the Cable Guy. A lot of self-deprecating humor about himself and his family, and he sure as heck isn't a Picasso. Well, maybe he is more of a Picasso picture, a little bit weird and funkily drawn, because he's not a pretty guy on stage.
Yeah, I mean, he's a little heavy, and he what he's done with that is amazing. And I have to say that there's a lot of people who are so down on Larry the Cable Guy and Dane Cook and Russell Peters and Carrot Top and all of these other comedians, but what they don't understand is if comedy gets expanded, comedians like Dane Cook or whatever, they bring comedy to a giant audience, and that helps all of us. It's like a rising tide lifts all boats. Right.
Yeah, I've never had like a comedian that I say, oh, I don't like them, or I don't like what they do, because I'm just starting to become a student of comedy. I mean, you got to give credit to anybody who's willing to get up there and be vulnerable on stage, whether you like their brand of comedy or not. I mean, I don't. When you say they get a rough time, I don't know if you mean what you mean exactly. I don't know if people. I've never heard anybody really say anything negative to me about some of those people. I have heard people knock on Dane Cook, actually, I guess, but sometimes I think it's a little bit out of jealousy. I mean, it's just they're huge. I mean, how do you not? I don't see how you just can't love them and enjoy their comedy, even when they make goofy mistakes. I mean, look at in the news last week. Dane Cook took a beating last week because of a joke he did in about the Colorado incident. So you are right with that. I guess I have seen some crazy stuff out there.
Well, I think you'll find as you get more into comedy, the negativity comes from other comedians. There's so much like hatred towards Larry the Cable Guy, but it's so funny because most of the people I think you interview are successful at this, and so they're not going to really be that type of person. But there's these people who just rip on Dane Cook and Larry the Cable Guy, and I mean me, and I'm not even that well known, but they don't see. The thing of it is, they all have one thing in common: they're not working comedians. They don't make any money doing this. I mean, I have three real haters that are they just really hate me, and they say my comedy it's been done before and it's hacky and whatever, and they're posting negative stuff about me. But the thing is if you add up all of the money that the three of them have made in their entire careers, I can make more in one show than the three of them have made in a collective 25 years of doing comedy. And so you will see all these people just ripping on Dane Cook and Larry the Cable Guy and saying they shouldn't be doing that kind of comedy, or Carrot Top because he uses props, or guitar comics, and the thing is, it's so funny. It's like telling an artist, you shouldn't do country music, or you shouldn't do
Right.
rap, or you shouldn't do classical. It just you'll find this to be true. There's just so much negativity, especially in New York and L.A. amongst all these. You'll find that as you get into the career, into the business more. It's really sad.
And I know you say if I ever make it up to New York to check out that one class, but oddly, I do get up to New York once or twice a year because that's where I'm originally from. I came down to Florida about about 5 years ago. Thank you, but I never even, you'll all joke around and say I want to have a radio show and I want to be in movies, but I never really thought about being a comedian or anything. It was just something I tried a couple of years ago. I was turning 38, and I said, "What am I going to do to?" To like surprise myself. It was like my own little midlife crisis. I said, what am I going to do to change my life? And I decided I was going to try to get on stage and be a comic because I'd been in sales for, at that time, 23 years on commission. And I felt I knew how to read people and talk to people and feed off of their body language. And I thought that would be the next step. And not only did I think it would help me with sales, but I thought it would help me with the ability to move up ladders corporately and public speaking, because there's times that I get the opportunity to speak in front of a lot of the executives at, some of the different companies that I've worked at. And I wanted to feel more confident in front of 50 or 60 or however many executives may be in a large or small meeting.
I think that's a great idea. In fact, that's why I took comedy class in the first place, is because my job at Intel was speaking in front of thousands of people, doing technical demonstrations on stage with the CEO, and I was terrified of the public speaking. And that class, trust me, if you can do comedy, you will never be afraid of making a corporate presentation. And that is why I would even if you don't have any aspirations to do it as a career, I would recommend it to anybody who is afraid of speaking, because there's so many jobs that would enhance your career if you could be better at public speaking. And I would highly, highly recommend it. And it'll help you get over the fear. And in general, I think, even if you don't really want to do it as a career, I think it's always great to do a lot of different things. I've done a lot of research on this, and they said, if you do the same thing every day, then your life just isn't really that remarkable. But if you do new things, I took a trapeze class the other day, which is something I always wanted to do in New York, and and I was afraid. My friends were like, "Oh, you're gay," and I said, "Well, I don't care what they think." And there's a new Van Halen song out this year, and one of my favorite lines from that is when David Lee Roth says, "When was the last time you did something for the first time?" And most people they're just in a comfort zone, and so for you to take a class or to do comedy or ballet or something new, I think it's something I would recommend for everyone. But yeah, if you're in New York, look me up. Come take the class with me, because it is absolutely awesome. I highly recommend it.
It's awesome. Give out the name and the website for that guy and his class, because we do have a lot of young comedians that listen.
Okay. Well, my first class was, of course, was with Judy Carter, and she's wonderful, and that was my first class. But the class that I've really got a lot out of, I guess because I'm in New York more,
right?
And so I have more of a chance to take his class. It's comedyinstitute.com. It's called the American Comedy Institute, and that class, he is just fantastic. I can't say enough good things about him. And again, all the success I have, I ascribe to his teaching and trying out new material. And so I highly recommend it. And Judy Carter, I can't take her class because I'm not in LA as much, but I've hired her for private consultation, and she's helped me come up with some amazing stuff. She's awesome too.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple.
And of course, she has the books.
Oh yeah, she has some very popular books.
Yeah,
I've talked to other comedians in the past who said they've paid her, and it's good money just to talk to them on the phone for an hour to go over different ideas and that whole, just the whole premise of her class and run ideas by her. They just pay her for just as little as an hour. So it's pretty interesting how you can build your name up and be known for that and have such a drawing. Because she, not only is she a great comedian, but she helps out others, and she probably gets a bad rap from some people because of the way she preaches to do the corporate comedy and work she's been a big promoter of working corporate comedy and getting away from the clubs a little bit because the clubs can have a little bit of a negative vibe, is what she says.
She's 100% right, and I can't, I can't understand someone who would criticize a lady for for wanting you to make $10,000 to $15,000 to $25,000 a night instead of $25 a night. I mean, how can you criticize someone for who's trying to increase your income? It's like it's like saying, here's a broker who told me to buy Apple in 1990. I hate that guy. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
And
what she said to what she said in her first class, as I said, she said this to me, to all people in the class, her first class that I took years ago, and I didn't really, that didn't register. I didn't really believe that, but, I hired her for 2 hours in person in New York, and I went to the place where she was staying, and we sat, and, we were I told her I want to do this, that, and the other, and then I told her that I'd really been bullied in school, and I want to talk about that, and then we just totally focused on that for like an hour and a half, and she wrote this speech for me. She said, you know what? You're not only going to make people laugh, but when you're done, I mean, they're going to start crying when you talk about what happened to you, and then you're going to bring them back, and then you're going to get them laughing again, and at the end, they're going to give you you're going to get a standing ovation at every show, and she made me actually believe that, and I do believe it, and it was incredible. I mean, she had me like just tears rolling down my face. But it was really something that changed my life. But she's right. She gives this example. She was on a cruise ship with 2 other comics, one of whom had just been on Letterman, and I think they were getting $1,500 each for performing on that ship for a week. And she was flown onto that ship, and she made $25,000 for doing one night.
Wow.
And someone who's teaching you how to do that, I don't know how you can get upset at them for wanting to increase your income.
I guess the only way you can get upset at her is if you're not able to figure out how to do a corporate show, which kind of leads me to my next question for you, because obviously there's a lot of preparation that you have to do differently if you're going to work for some of the corporate clients that you have, from the Royal Bank of Canada, Pfizer. I mean, there's a wealth of different companies that you've worked for. So you don't necessarily just go in there with the same material that you do with a theater or a comedy club or even a birthday or a wedding. You really have to prepare. And, what steps do you take when you're preparing to go in front of, whoever it is? I mean, you've been in front of the United Nations, Time Warner, Toastmasters International. How do you prepare individually for these shows? How long does it normally take you?
Well, I have an admission here. There's a lot of comedians who do what I do for corporations, and they will call up the company, and then they'll write, spend hours and days and weeks writing all these custom jokes and this, that, and the other. And to be truthful, I've never really done that. What my thing, when I'm going into a corporate event, what I'm doing is more of a pruning. Is I'm saying, okay, this joke would be okay for television because it's clean, but it would not be appropriate for this corporation because people will get offended. So when I'm going into a corporation, what I've done is I've gone through my set and I've pruned away jokes that I know I can't do, and that's really all it is for me. The custom writing is something that other comedians do, but it just, you know what, I just haven't done it, and I've been able to get away without doing it because, you see, since I know that these jokes will work for pretty much any audience, I also know that they'll work for the corporate audience, right?
Right.
So I can just go in and I can just edit in my brain and just say, okay, don't do that joke, don't do this joke, don't do that topper because it's a little bit on the edge. And I've found that, as I do more and more, I mean, in the beginning I would do stuff that people would say, whoa, you were really pushing it there. And so I just realized, I know now, and I wish I'd known this then, I know now what jokes I can and cannot do in a corporate environment. So it's just I have so much material, it's a simple matter of pruning. And here's the other thing. For some reason, I don't know why comedians do this, but they will go and they'll pick on, say, the CEO or the guest of honor. I heard a story where Colin Quinn was booked with Robert De Niro, some huge party, and he kept asking him, hey, you got to lose some weight, you're so fat. And there was Bernie Mac who did an Obama campaign event in 2008, and you can look this up. People were really offended because he was telling all this profanity and filthy jokes, And why do that? Because you have all this other material that will work fine. Why offend people with profanity? Why pick on the guest of honor? Just cut it, because if you're experienced enough, you have enough material that you can do stuff that's not offensive and not push the edge, and then get hired back to do it again. So to answer your question, I really don't prepare that much other than pruning.
All right. See, that's a little bit different than what Judy Carter had actually said, because she said she'd call up and speak to maybe the big boss's administrative assistants and find out who like the company jokester is, and pick on them a little bit. And she had said that she incorporated that a little bit. So you pretty much do the opposite. You stick with your material, and that's pretty cool. I mean, it's different than what I thought corporate comedy is, and I guess it can be different for everybody. You go with what works. I was almost expecting you to say the amount of time that you spent, and exactly what you said you didn't do.
Well, you see, that's precisely why Judy Carter can make $25,000, because she will go and put that time in. But over and above that, I mean, she's a great writer who can come up with stuff. And see, I'm just not that great of a writer. I mean, there's some comedians. I think 50% of comedians can sit at the computer and then go, okay, I'm going to come up with 50 jokes on this subject and do this for 4 hours. And the other half of the comedians are like me, where we're talking with someone on the phone, or walking down the street and we think of something, or we're out to dinner with a lot of people, and there's so many jokes that funny things people say, we write them down. And I'm much more of a spontaneous kind of on the fly comedian, and I'm just not that talented of a writer as she is and some others are. I have another friend he's so funny, John DiDomenico. He comes and he'll show up as Donald Trump, and he puts these wigs on, and Dr. Phil, and he'll be, or Austin Powers, and he has all these characters, and he spends weeks like working on this corporate, and asking questions, and you know what? Just my talent just does not lie there, and I don't have the focus. I just have ADD.
But you do some really great voiceovers. I've seen a lot of you did Arnold Schwarzenegger, George Bush, a whole slew of different characters that you can do voiceovers for. Yeah,
that's true. But by and large, for these corporate things, I pretty much, I know what they're going to laugh at. And I just did one in the UK for during the Olympics. I was over there, and I had a chance to go to the Olympics, and it was on someone else's dime, and it was a bunch of tire manufacturers. And I could have gone in and written a bunch of custom tire jokes, but I thought, nothing really comes to mind when it comes to tires. And I guess I could have learned more about the business and whatever, but it's just easy just to go in and just say, okay, I know that these jokes are going to work, and I do them, and then they think, oh, this guy's hilarious. And this actually was someone who had hired me in Dubai, a tire concern, hired me in Dubai last January of 2011, and that went so well that he said, hey, can you come back and do this for a different group in the UK? I said, sure. And now they like that so much they want me to go to their next meeting, which is in Accra, Ghana, next year. So.
And they pay for your trip
over there? I guess this is kind of like a lazy... What's that?
And they pay for your trips to go over. They probably treat you like a king while you're there, and they give you a large check.
Yeah, and the flights are first class. Now I can demand business class overseas, and I fly so much that on Delta, all the flights domestically are upgraded, so I'm always in first, and the pay is incredible, and you get to see countries and do stuff and meet people. And again, there's all those comics who say, well, you're a sellout, and you shouldn't do corporate comedy, but again, I don't understand that, because you're maximizing your income, and that's the other thing. Richard Pryor, he did kind of like the Bill Cosby type of clean stuff, and then I think it was, I don't know, after 5 or 10 years, one day he was in front of an audience. I think it was somewhere in Vegas in front of 2,000 people, and he just said, I can't do this anymore. And then he went and he wrote the material that was much more true to himself and was profane, and talked about his neighborhood and the prostitutes. And here's the thing, okay, if you're one of those purists who are like, well, you should never do corporate comedy, I would say this, do the corporate stuff, stay clean, and then you can make a ton of money, and then you can have the leisure to, and sit on a pile of money and write what really is true to you, and then go out what you really want to do, instead of starving for decades.
All right. You got me curious. You keep talking about these piles of money. And you said that, you've seen Judy Carter and told a story about her making as much as $25,000 for one show. So we're gonna get personal. We got to be frank. What's the highest you've been paid for one show? Can we ask that?
Yeah, the most I got was 15 thou, and that was at the Mountain Winery out in the Bay Area. And the only reason I got that, and this is the other thing that's so important. I want to tell people who are thinking about doing comedy or who are doing comedy. When someone calls you up and says they want to hire you, you have got to quote a really high price. There is a guy right here in D.C. where I'm hanging out right now who is the funniest guy I've ever seen. I could never dream of being this funny, and he's funny off the cuff with he talks to the audience. And I mean, example, he'll say, so what do you do for a living? He goes, I work at a nonprofit. And he'll go, oh, what, AOL? Because AOL's in the area, they're losing money. And he's so funny. And he told me the other day he got a call from a company. They had seen him at one of these $100 shows, and they asked him to come perform at this event. And the other performer was going to be the amazing Kreskin, who you remember as this ESP guy. And you know what he told him? He told him $500. I said, dude, you're out of your freaking mind. You should have said 5,000. You're nuts. He goes, yeah, man. I was feeling bad because when they said 500, really? Well, for that much, can we get some other comedians as well? And I said, see, the problem is you said 500, and now you can't raise your price. But if you say 5,000 or 10,000, then they could always chisel your price downwards, right? So the only reason I got that 15,000 is when they called me, I had a feeling, because it was a really successful Blade network server company, I said, my price is 15,000, and they just said, okay.
Nice.
And sometimes I'll quote 15, and they'll say, well, our budget's more like 5 or 10, and I'll be like, well, normally I would say no, but yeah, I'll say yes. And the key is just to ask for it.
Right.
If you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And there's so many comedians in my position who would have said, 500 or 200, and so they would have cost themselves, $14,800.
Right.
So the key is to just, let me tell you this one story. I know this is kind of drawing things out, but you may remember that Elliot Spitzer was caught with a prostitute a few years ago. You remember that whole deal, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I remember when they interviewed this one prostitute, and she says, you know what? I'm not the best-looking girl, but when I used to charge $200 for a half hour or whatever, men would treat me like absolute dirt. Now that I charge $2,000, they treat me like a queen, and I make 10 times more money. And again, I'm not the best-looking girl in the world, and that really taught me a lot, because the more you charge, the better they think you are. It's a real weird phenomenon, but it's like the old saying says, you get what you pay for. People really believe you're funnier if you have a higher price.
And it's funny that you tie it to a prostitute, because as comedians, we really are out there prostituting ourselves for laughs and for money. We're just selling our wares. Ours are just verbal. It's really all it is.
Right, and some people pay $50 for, and some people pay $3,000, and I mean, ultimately, I guess they're getting the same thing, right?
Exactly.
For a prostitute. So my advice is just charge more. And see, what happens is people get into that club mentality. They think, okay, I cannot make more than $25 on a weeknight and $75 on a weekend performing these clubs in New York, unless of course I'm a big name. And so they get into that mentality, I'm not worth that much more. But when someone calls you for a private event, and this guy, he's not clean at all. I mean, but yet he would have been fantastic for that event, because they wanted him, and he said 500, and I said, dude, you could have easily gotten 5,000, especially
right.
if they were hiring the amazing Kreskin.
There you go. Well, hey Dan, we are down to just the last 2 or 3 minutes of the show, so I do want to have you do our little shameless plug segment. So go ahead and tell us where you're going to be at over the next few weeks, because I know you're a pretty busy guy.
Well, I just got off of a 5-city tour. It was actually sponsored by Comedy Central, and that was in India, the Clean Comedy Fest. And then I did that corporate function in the UK with a with a wedding in between in New Jersey. Let's see now. Here's the thing. I'm not really in the position where I have to promote my shows, because they're events that are kind of happening anyway, and they've added me. So, like, I'm at a wedding in Houston, and then I'm on a cruise ship. But here's the thing. If people want to find out more, they can go to my site, which is comediandan.com. my name is Dan, and I'm a comedian, so it's comediandan.com. You can also buy my book on Amazon. It's called How to Become a Full-Time Stand-Up Comedian. And you can find that just by going to Amazon and typing in my last name, which is, it's pronounced Nainan, but it's spelled Nainan. It's Nainan. And that's really all I have to promote, and I would just tell people, hey, stay clean, do clean comedy, quote way more than you think you're worth or more than you can get, and above all else, take a class because it could change your life because it changed mine.
All right. Well, thank you very much for calling in. I do want to give a quick shout out to, we are going to have some, as I said, some great guests coming in. Next week, we're going to have J. Wendell Walker. Right after that, we're going to have Ward Smith and Dobie Maxwell. So those are going to be a couple of great shows coming up, and then Josh Sneed and a few other ones in the future. As for my comedy, I'll be around at the Improv and some of the other open mics around the Tampa Bay in the next few weeks. So look for Fat Davey on stage and tune in next week for another great show. Thank you very much again, Dan, for calling in and spending some time with us, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be in such great company like Jackie Mason and Tom Dreesen and Judy Carter. I'm I'm humbled that you actually had me on. I thank you so kindly.
No, thank you, and I think it was a great show, and a lot of things were taught, learned, and a lot of people who listen to the show are going to see that, just the corporate comedy that I've gotten from other people where you have to learn so much about the business that you're doing the corporate event for just isn't true, because if you're funny, they're there to laugh, not necessarily at themselves. You don't have to pick on their company. They just want to laugh.
That's right. And now, where can I hear some of your shows archived? Can I hear them?
Yeah, it's always
download
live.
Them, or?
Yep, it's always live on Comedy Slam Radio on Monday nights, but you can go to Let's Be Frank's podcast, and that'll pull up either iTunes or Stitcher Radio, and you can find all of the shows there. So again, it's Let's Be Frank's podcast on Stitcher Radio and on iTunes, and you'll be able to find it. I'll probably email you over a link, and if you want to share that on your Facebook page and around, spread the word about how great Fat Davey and the Let's Be Frank show is.
Cool. As a matter of fact, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and I'm going to go to my iPhone. I guess it'll be a few days for this one to be up, right?
This will probably be up by tomorrow at the latest, tomorrow night at the latest.
Fantastic. I just found it. This is great. This is fantastic.
You could see some of the last ones. And we always, unlike most podcasts, we go live, and then we just put them up live. So there's not a lot of touch-up work or prep, or if there was a mistake on it, you get to hear the mistakes, which makes us a little interesting. But we do got to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's the same with the Leo Laporte. Have you ever heard of Leo Laporte's podcast, The Tech Guy? He is like one of the biggest. His thing is listened to by like 1 million people a day, and he just leaves everything in the commercials, and you can hear him eating his hamburger while they're playing some other promo, and he's talking to people who are visiting. I visited there. It's totally seat of the pants. It's great. This is great because when I pull up Let's Be Frank, it also has Frank Zappa comes up.
Yep. You definitely got to do the Let's Be Frank's podcast. But listen, thank you very much. We got another show waiting to come on with a couple of more great comedians. So, Dan, thank you very much for calling in, and we'll speak to you soon. I'll follow up with you during the week.
Yes, sir. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody, and we'll speak to you next week. Thanks for listening in to the Let's Be Frank show on ComedySlamRadio.com. If you missed this show or would like to catch up on past shows, visit us on Stitcher Radio and iTunes at Let's Be Frank's podcast, and have a great night. We'll see you next week.
What was that? I'll tell you what that was. That was another fine show from ComedySlamRadio.com, where we put the .com